Good evening, everyone. Welcome back. I hope we had a nice and refreshing break, and we're very excited to start 2025 with a new series on Hilchot Pesach. If at any time the connection is not great, please immediately let me know rather than letting it go on. So we have been learning on Thursday night. We've been doing halakha. The last couple of years we have been learning Hilchot Shabbat, but after we did recently a bit of Sukkot, and then we did Chanukah, and now we have an opportunity, B'ezras Hashem, to learn as much as we can of Hilchot Pesach. Hilchot Pesach consists of 61 chapters in the Shulchan Aruch. So Chanukah, we did about 15 chapters, and this is about 60, and they are slightly more complex. And so we will do our best to get through as much as we can, although I doubt we'll be able to do it all, but we will go in order of the Shulchan Aruch. Two further points of introduction is that firstly, this year, remember, Pesach is more complex than a regular year. This year, Pesach falls on Motzei Shabbat, which means Erev Pesach is on a Shabbat, which always has its own complexities. And of course, there are a couple of chapters in the Shulchan Aruch on that, and we'll, B'ezras Hashem, go through that all. We have in the past, a few years ago, learned parts of Pesach, but that's right at the end. That's the actual Seder. I doubt we'll do that this year. That's right at the end. And so this year, our focus is to get through from the beginning as much as possible. That's about Bedikat Chametz, about the Biur Chametz, and Hagalat Kelim, and the baking of matzot, all of these things which we don't always learn. So that's what B'ezras Hashem, our focus will be for the next few months. We have about 3 months, and so we will try, B'ezras Hashem, to get through as much as we can. I don't share the screen on Thursday nights, and so I'll just copy the link once more and post it here for everyone. If you want to follow inside, we'll be basing ourselves on the Shulchan Aruch and the main points on the Shana Barura, but of course with the Pesach mainly of the Sfaradi. So with that in mind, we will, B'ezras Hashem, begin Hilchot Pesach, Siman Taf Chaf Tet 429, She'en Noflin Al Penehem Bechol Chodesh Nisan Ubo Bet Seifim, that this chapter is about the month of Nisan. So it says Shulchan Aruch, Seif Aleph, Sha'alin B'Hilchot HaPesach Kodem LaPesach Sheloshim Yom. We ask pertinent questions to Pesach from 30 days before the Chag. So what's the source for this? The source for this is the Gemara. The Gemara says, Sho'alin v'dorshin be'inyan HaChag Sheloshim Yom Kodem. We ask and we discuss about the Chag 30 days before. That's one Gemara. And so from this Gemara, most of the Rishonim understand that there is an obligation before Pesach to talk about the halachot of Pesach and to talk and to discuss and expound in drashot and in shiurim about Pesach 30 days before. So Baruch Hashem, we've done this not just 30 days before, but 90 days before. So that's already a good start. That's the main understanding. However, there is another Gemara. The Gemara tells us in Megillah that Moshe tiken lehem Israel. Moshe instituted shiur dorshin hilchot Pesach b'Pesach, Sukkot b'Sukkot. Moshe instituted that the Bnei Israel would speak and study the laws of each Chag on the Chag itself. And so the Ran, Rabbeinu Nisim, asks, these two Gemarot seem to be contradictory. Because on the one hand, we're being told that Moshe instituted for it to be done on the Chag. On the other hand, we're told that Shloshim Yom Kodem, 30 days before. So which one is it? Is it 30 days before, or is it on the Chag itself? So the Rabbeinu Nisim has his own Hidush, which is that actually, that which the Gemara says 30 days before we inquire and we ask, that means there's a halakha in the laws of Talmud Torah. When a rabbi has many questions, it happens, rabbi has too many questions to answer. And so they have to work out what's the most pressing to answer before the others. And so what the Gemara is saying is, Sho'alin is you respond from 30 days before Pesach, then anything got to do with Pesach, you respond to first. You go, end of the day, you look at your emails and you look at your WhatsApps and you're looking at all the different questions you have to answer. You answer the questions we've got to do with Pesach before that. And when people are asking, they ask and focus on Pesach. But the actual teaching about and studying about and learning about is only on the Chag itself. The obligation is on the Chag itself. That's his understanding. As I said, most of the Rishonim did not accept this, and they understood actually there is an obligation from 30 days before. And they answered this contradiction in different ways. Either that was Moshe's institution, but this is now another institution afterwards. There was the biblical, the Moshe's idea at the beginning, and then this was developed 30 days before. And there's another idea in the Beit Yosef says is that actually 30 days before, you talk about all the things got to do with the preparation for the Chag. And Moshe was talking about on the Chag itself that you need to learn about the halachot of the Chag, of Yom Tov, of what's relevant to the Chag itself. So two different aspects. In any case, most of the Rishonim, as I said, understood that there is an obligation from 30 days before to talk about Hilchot Pesach, and as such, that's how the Shulchan Aruch rules, Shalim B'Hilchot Pesach Kodem Pesach 30 Yom, that we begin to talk and discuss about the rules of Pesach from 30 days before, which means really Talmidei Chachamim who are studying the whole day should carve aside time from 30 days before Pesach to at least a bit of the day, at least something to review. However much you've learned in Hilchot Pesach, as always, every year it's important to review it and to go over it because these are very relevant questions. And I'm telling you from my personal experience, the time that get the most questions throughout the year is certainly before Pesach. That's when you get the most questions, more than Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, more than other times of the year, specifically before Pesach. And so this is why it's important for us to learn about this, and we each have an individual obligation to actually think about Pesach from 30 days before, and when we're learning to try to focus on that the 30 days before. Now the Achronim discuss whether this is specifically to Pesach or does it apply to other Chagim as well. Some of the poskim, Shabra brings some of the poskim understood it to be referring to all Chagim, 30 days before Sukkot. 30 days before Shavuot, I'm not exactly, you'll have to learn the halachot of Yom Tov 30 days before Shavuot. But others understood, no, it's specifically Pesach because the rules of Pesach are so complex and so vast. The Vilna Gaon, his compromise, his understanding was that before Pesach, it's an obligatory. Before Shavuot and Sukkot, it's merely a good thing. It's a nice custom, but it's not the same obligation. And so this is why the Shulchan Aruch brings this in Hilchot Pesach, and he says specifically, Shoalim be'ilchot Pesach kodem la Pesach. Shulchan Aruch's understanding seems to be this is a din unique to Pesach itself, that 30 days before we discuss and expound on the laws of Pesach. Having said that, as we said earlier on, there is another din that on the Chag itself, whether it's Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, that we use that time on these individual Chagim to learn about the halachot of the Chag and the correct thing to do on those days. And this is why, it's whilst it's lovely people have set things to learn every day, and that's great, this should continue. But if a person has the opportunity to learn on Chag, should of course prioritize the learning of things relevant to the Chag itself over all of the three Chagim. These 30 days are before Pesach, and that actually begins on Purim. This is why there is a minhag. They're already on Purim itself. You share an idea on Pesach, you share a halacha on Pesach, because the 30 days begins with Purim itself. Now, the Mishnah Berurah writes, and it's worthwhile, I'll just read this out. He says, of course, aside from the 30 days, we have Shabbat HaGadol, the Drasha of Shabbat HaGadol, which we will learn about tonight as well. But he says, "Vayikar lehorot lam darkei Hashem." You see this a lot in some communities, especially the very Haredi ones. And actually, there's a whole pilpul. There is a whole analysis of something which is not relevant to halacha on the Shabbat before. The rabbi gets up and gives a whole, very complex and deep understanding of a specific halacha in Hilchot Pesach, which is not actually relevant. Says Mishnah Berurah rejects that. It's actually not correct. Says the main thing is that we're learning on all the practical aspects.
Rabbi, we're losing you.
Okay, fine. I'm back now.
Rabbi, you're freezing. You're breaking up.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So the Mishabra rejects this, and for him, the most important, and this has always been the derech of the Sfaradim as well, is that we focus on the relevant and practical aspects of the Chag in advance of it. Okay. The Rambam brings this to halacha, and he clearly understands. Is it better now? Or is it still problematic?
Yes, Rabbi is still breaking up.
Still breaking up? Oh,
You're breaking up and freezing again. I don't know if it's just me, but
let's try a different network. Okay, so let's hopefully it should be better now. Apologies for that. So the Rambam, by the way, when he lists these halachot, he actually talks about this and he lists them as two distinct dinim. There is the din of on the Chag, you learn about the Chag itself, and then there is also the din of preparing 30 days before. So these are two separate dinim. Okay, good. Continues the Rama. Uminhag, it's customary, liknot hitim lehalkan lanin mitzorach Pesach, to purchase wheat to distribute to poor people in advance of Pesach. V'chol mi shedar ba'ir yud bet chodesh tzarich iten zeh. Anyone who's been living in the town, in the city for 12 months must contribute to the community fund for the poor people to buy them wheat for Pesach. Now, it's interesting the Rama uses the word minhag, it's custom. The Achronim already point out, actually, this seems to be more of an obligation. It's mentioned in the Talmud Yerushalmi as being an obligation, and so they question why the Rama lists this as being only a minhag. The answer they give is that, of course, it is an obligation, but the reason the Rama says it's a minhag is that the minhag is actually go and buy wheat-ready food, right? You can do tzedakah just by giving money, but actually, the minhag is developed that because of Pesach, you go on and actually buy the food itself, and this is why there's a beautiful minhag that people actually before Pesach give out food to people rather than just the money, so they make it easier for them to be able to prepare for Pesach. And so this is an obligation that a person gives in advance of Pesach. He gives money to the communal fund, to someone who's responsible for this, for distributing to the poor people for Pesach. Why specifically do we find this halakha here in Pesach, not in other places? This is because, of course, Pesach is even then the Hachamim recognize Pesach is the most expensive of the Hagim, and that's why they specifically did it for Pesach. We don't find the halakha that before Sukkot you have to give tzedakah, before Shavuot, before Shabbat. These are lovely things to do any time of the year, but specifically before Pesach, we find the concept of giving tzedakah to people, and this is why it's called kimha de pisha, the flour of the Pesach. Why is it called the flour? The Rama wrote that it's you buy the wheat. The Mishnah Berurah writes that the minhag developed even further. That not only would, as I said, you could just give money, but the minhag developed, the Rama says you give wheat, and then the minhag developed even further, you give flour. Now the minhag is developed, they actually give the matzot itself. You know, many that you give out to people who need, you give them matzot. And somehow the matzot, which are meant to be lehem oni, the bread of affliction, that's all we could eat in Egypt, somehow it's become the most expensive commodity of Pesach. For some reason, we'll see why when we learn the halachot of baking matzah, why it's become such an expensive commodity. But that's why it's called kimha de pisha, the flour of Pesach. But really, any form of giving tzedakah for Pesach fulfills this mitzvah and this obligation really before Pesach, and therefore we should be cognizant of this, so that we have this obligation before Pesach, each person according to his or her ability. To be able to distribute and be part of the community, right? Once you're in the community for 12 months, or you enter a community and you intend to live there permanently, then you're now part of the community for this aspect. And the same works the other way around. Remember, there is an obligation, aniyeh ircha kodmin. Especially when it comes to Pesach, you need to focus on the people within your town. All lovely giving to organizations and Torah institutions across the world, but ultimately it needs to start at home, and especially at Pesach and our local communities. That's where our focus needs to be. And who's considered a resident of these local communities? Someone who's lived in the community for 12 months, or someone who has moved to the community and the intention is for him or her to live permanently in this community. A person who's visiting just for Pesach, then the obligation is less, of course. People need to look after him, but the obligation is less upon him than it is to everyone else who's actually a resident and part of the kahal. Yeah. Okay. Good. So that's those two things. We've learned about the importance of studying on the Chag in preparation for the Chag. And then we've talked about the obligation slash minhag to distribute money slash wheat slash flour slash matzot or anything else in advance of Pesach for those who are needy. Okay, good. Says the Shulchan Aruch Seif Bet, En noflim al penehem bechol chodesh Nisan. We refrain from tahanun the entire month of Nisan. Why is this the case? The first 12 days, the reason is because in the time of the Mishkan, there was the inauguration. Is it clear now, by the way? Can everyone hear me? Is it clear? Yeah. In the time of the Mishkan, there was the inauguration every day, and each prince brought his own sacrifice, and that was a Yom Tov. And so the first 12 days, then you've got the 8 days of Pesach. And since the majority of the Chag, of the month, 20 days has passed B'Kedusha, we say the entire month as well. Also, there is a midrash that the inauguration of the new Beit HaMikdash will happen at the end of Nisan after Pesach. And so because of all of this, we refrain from tahanun the entire month of Nisan. And we say Yishem, we don't say Tzidkatecha on Shabbat in Mincha, because Tzidkatecha was instituted. And I remember we learned this some time ago in Hilchot Shabbat. Why do we say Tzidkatecha on Shabbat afternoon? The 3 verses Tzidkatecha. Why do we say those 3 verses on Shabbat afternoon? Anyone know? It's a kind of tziduk hadin for the 3 tzaddikim who died on Shabbat. Right? Moshe, David. I think the third one is Shlomo. I think. Although I would want to check that to be sure. And so it's a kind of tziduk adin. It's a kind of remembering the dead. And so that's in a happy time of the month of Nisan. Refrain from that. Ve'en maspidim bo. There were no eulogies in the month of Nisan. As we have explained when we learned Hilchot Chanukah, eulogies in the olden days was a very intense experience. And there would be people who would be employed to actually cry and to bang their chests. And so that's forbidden during the month of Nisan. We don't announce publicly any fasts on the month of Nisan. Of course, if a person has his own fasts every Monday, Thursday, and Monday, the Shulchan Aruch holds that he continues that. If you fast throughout the year, Monday, Thursday, Monday, as is an old custom recorded in the Shulchan Aruch elsewhere, to fast on Mondays, Thursdays, every Monday and Thursday, then you can continue that in Nisan, but not on a public scale, on a private scale. So if you have your own fixed fasts every week, you can continue that during the month of Nisan. And of course, there's the obligation for the firstborns to fast on, what's the obligation? We'll have to clarify that. There's a chapter later on about the Bechorot on Erev Pesach, so we'll come to that. The Bechorot fast on Erev Pesach. A couple of points with this to be aware is that stone settings, it's not realized this, people fix stone settings in the month of Nisan, it's forbidden to fix a stone setting in the month of Nisan. A funeral has to take place with limited eulogy. But at stone setting, there should be no justification for fixing in advance a stone setting for the month of Nisan, because of course that's a sad thing and it's eulogies, and so that should be not be fixed, the date for it, during the month of Nisan. Secondly, fasting on a wedding, a person's getting married during the month of Nisan, are you allowed to fast on your wedding day during the month of Nisan? Again, some allow it because it's a private fast, and that's generally what's taken on. But we should know, actually, people don't really know this, that the minhag of the Sfaradim, and more than that, actually, Hamadia holds it's actually wrong for Hatan to fast on his wedding day. For the obvious reason that this is a Yom Tov. It's a Yom Tov for the Hatan. And so actually it's inappropriate for him to fast. He does allow a person to fast, a Hatan to fast if during the day, if he's getting married at night. So you can fast during the day and then eat at night before the Huppah. But if you're getting married in the day, it's actually not our minhag Sfaradim to fast on the wedding day. People think it's a big thing that you have to fast on your wedding day. No, actually, there's room to say it's the wrong thing to do to fast on one's wedding day. For the Sfaradim, of course. Continues the Rama. Gam en omrim bo tziduk hadin b'chol chodesh Nisan. We refrain from tziduk hadin at a funeral during the month of Nisan. V'na'agush en metanim bo tanit klal afim shemit bo aviv o imo. The Rama says that the minhag is you don't fast at all, even private fasts, even for one's parents, one doesn't fast. But tanit halom tanin, of course, one does fast a tanit halom. If one wants to fast for a bad dream, you're even allowed to fast on Shabbat for that. So you can do that if you wish to. Although in Hilchot Shabbat, the halacha is if you had a terrible dream and you decided to fast on Shabbat, you can do that, but then you have to add an extra fast the next day on Sunday to atone for the fact that you fast on Shabbat. That wouldn't apply in the month of Nisan. You wouldn't need to, if you fasted in the month of Nisan of a terrible dream, you wouldn't need to compensate it with another fast in the month of Iyar, because it's less of a problem of fasting during the month of Nisan. Okay, and finishes off the Rama. You don't say Mizmor LeTodah on Erev Pesach. Mizmor LeTodah, because that was the Todah offerings which had the bread. And since on Erev Pesach he didn't have the bread, they refrained from saying Mizmor LeTodah. We Sfaradim do say it on Erev Pesach, but it's just a minhag. It's customary to eat well on the day after each of the three festivals, and this is called Isru Chag. The Ramah's source for this is the Gemara in Sukkah. The Gemara in Sukkah tells us, the pasuk which we say in Hallel, Isru Chag ba'avotim at karnot hamizbeach. The Gemara explains that to mean, the simple meaning of the verse is, Isru Chag tied to the Chag ba'avotim with ropes, at karnot or ba'avotim with ropes, the karnot hamizbeach to the horns of the altar. But the Gemara explains this to mean, Isru Hag, tied to the festival, keep yourself attached, continue the spirit of the festival, ba'avotim, with fat animals. Avot means fat and thick, with good meat, ad karnot hamizbeach, and it's like a person is offered up a sacrifice on Isru Chag. And so there is an idea in the Gemara, and this is what the Rama is bringing, that a person eats well the day after Pesach as well. The idea being is that we've had the spiritual high, we're back in the mundane world, and so we need something to be able to transport us through. And so we try to take something, a meal, something mundane in our lives. Food is just an example, but anything in our lives, and try to infuse it with the light of the Chag and bring it into our day-to-day lives. That's the idea of Isru Chag. And this is why in Isru Chag it's forbidden. One really shouldn't fast on Isru Chag. In Nisan, anyway, we learned you can't fast. But even a day after Shavuot or day after Sukkot, a person shouldn't fast because it's a day of a person enjoying themselves with Achila Ushtiya. Good. So that brings us to the end of chapter 4 to 9. What we have seen here is firstly the concept of learning for the Chag in advance on the Chag itself, the concept of giving tzedakah before Pesach, and also various practices during the month of Nisan with regards to funerals and fasting. Good. Any questions? Yeah, fantastic. Taf Lamed Ubosif Echat 430 is a simple chapter. Shabbat Shelifnei Pesach Korinato Shabbat HaGadol Mipnei Hanes Shena'asa Bo. The Shabbat preceding Pesach is referred to as Shabbat HaGadol because of the miracle which happened on it. What's the miracle which happened on it? The Midrash tells us that when we left Egypt on the 15th of Nisan, we left Egypt on a Thursday, which would mean that the 10th of Nisan was a Shabbat. And the Torah tells us in Parashat Bo, Be'asor lachodesh hazeh, on the 10th of the month of Nisan, v'yikho lahem ish sela v'tavot sela bayit. Each family were to take and prepare the sheep, examine it for 4 days to be ready for the Paschal lamb on the 14th of Pesach, on the 14th of Nisan, on the eve of them leaving out of Egypt. And they took it and they tied it. And remember, the sheep was the deity of the Egyptians, and people saw this. And the Egyptians were like fuming, but they couldn't do anything about it. The trepidation of the Jews was already on them. And so this great miracle that each of the Jewish families were able to take, sacrifice the Egyptian deity and tie it up to their doorposts or to the different parts of their home, and there was no huge pogrom as a result of this. That was the miracle of, and for some reason the Hachamim instituted to remember this miracle on the Shabbat, not on the 10th. You could argue to make the 10th something special. They didn't say that. It said make the Shabbat always, despite the fact that Shabbat isn't always the 10th, but that's why it's called Shabbat HaGadol, because the year we left Egypt, there was a great miracle which happened on Shabbat HaGadol. Other Achronim give the reason for Shabbat HaGadol is because this is the time where the rabbi gives the longest drasha. It's not a joke that they mean it seriously, because it's Shabbat HaGadol. It's a time where lots of studying and teaching on Shabbat. And the Hida writes that the minhag of the Medaktikim, of the Yerushalayim, is that we wish each other not Shabbat Shalom Mevorach, but rather Shabbat HaGadol Shalom. That's what he writes on the Shabbat of Shabbat HaGadol, and this is the only one we find this. Although there are other Shabbats, there's Shabbat Hazon, there's Shabbat Nahamu, of course, and there's other Shabbatot, but we only wish each other Shabbat Shuvah, we only wish each other on Shabbat HaGadol Shalom because of this magnificent idea of coming to Pesach and the miracle. So we wish each other Shabbat HaGadol Shalom on the Shabbat before Pesach, which this year, of course, is going to be the day before Pesach. When the poskim write that when Erev Pesach falls on Shabbat, so although the Shabbat HaGadol is called the Shabbat before, that Shabbat itself, Erev Pesach, that's called Shabbat HaGadol, but yet the great long sermon, the great long drasha is given the Shabbat preceding, of course, because it won't be possible time-wise, and it's going to be too late to start telling you how to kasher your utensils on Shabbat. And so for that, given the week before, the preceding Shabbat. Good, says the Rama, והמנהג לומר במנחה ההגדה מתחילת עבדים היינו עד לכפר כל עוונותינו ופוסקינו ברכנו נפשי. It is the minhag of the Ashkenazim that they read part of the Haggadah on the Shabbat HaGadol. Even this year they'll read it on Erev Pesach, not the week before. The only time, even when Erev Pesach falls on Shabbat, the only thing which happens the previous Shabbat is the drasha. Everything else continues usually. The Shabbat, Erev Pesach is called Shabbat HaGadol. And also this minhag of the Ashkenazim, they read part of the Haggadah in advance on the Shabbat. Why? The idea is because of the miracle which we talked about, to remember this miracle, they wanted to read the Haggadah. The Vilna Gaon raised reservations about this minhag. He didn't like this minhag and he didn't do it. He said, because we clearly say in Haggadah, Yachol mi be'od yom, Talmud lomar mirosh chodesh, mirosh chodesh, chol omar. Right? We clearly say that the correct time to do it is to talk about Haggadah on Pesach night and not on preceding it. And so he didn't, he expressed reservations about this minhag, and therefore some of the Ashkenazim, not all the Ashkenazim have this minhag. So if you're in Ashkenazi synagogue before Shabbat, not all of the communities will do this, although many of the communities do indeed have this minhag to read Haggadah before, on the Shabbat before. Okay, good. So that was just more introductory. Now we come to the actual halachot. So as the Shulchan Aruch, as we know, Shulchan Aruch goes in the order. So we've done the month of Nisan, we've done the Shabbat before Pesach. Now we come to the night before Pesach, Erev Pesach, and what's going to be the first thing which comes to us is Bedikat Chametz, of course. Taf Lamed Aleph 431 Zman Bedikat Chametz Ubo Bet Seifim. The time for checking Chametz. Two parts to this chapter. Let's read Sif Aleph, and there's lots of points to discuss here. Sif Aleph, B'tchilat Leil Yudalet B'Nisan. At the beginning of the 14th night, which this year would be Friday night. That's the 14th, Friday night. Obviously, you can't do Bedikat Chametz on Friday nights, which is why it's then pushed to Thursday, brought forward to Thursday night. And again, everything got to do with this year, we'll discuss later on. But on a regular year, on the 14th night, or the night before when you're able to, but kinete hametz, you need to search for chametz le'or haner with the assistance of a candle, b'chorinu b'stakin, in all the cracks of the house. B'chol ha'mekomot shederech la'achnis sham hametz, in all places where it's regular to bring chametz into that part of the house. Full stop. So What is this obligation? Where does it come from? So firstly, note the Shulchan Aruch says B'tchilat Leil Yudar, the beginning of the night. So the mitzvah Bedikat Chametz is as soon as possible, the beginning of the night. And this we'll see is a specific din in Bedikat Chametz. You meant to do it as early as possible. Although every mitzvah which is done at night, you meant to do it as early as possible, but there's no, it's fine. We've got mitzvah to say Shema every evening. Yeah, and we've got mitzvah to pray Arvit every evening. Fine, okay. So Zerizim Makdimin mitzvot. We have the regular din. Do mitzvot alacrity. If you have the opportunity, do it as early as possible. Great. That's fine. But here we find a specific din in Bedikat Hametz that actually it's more than that. You have to do it at the beginning of the night, and there are ramifications for this we will see. But what's the reason for Bedikat Hametz? So actually, it's clear that we don't need to do Bedikat Hametz on the Torah. For the Torah, it suffices for a person to say anytime on the eve of Pesach, in the night or in the morning before, or even actually in one's heart, even in one's heart, if one decides sincerely and genuinely that I relinquish all property rights to any Hametz which I own, he's done it. From the Torah's perspective, that's done, that's good enough. Okay? And that means even if you have Hametz in your house, by the way, you have Hametz in your house, that's fine. You got in front of you, you've got your whiskey cupboard, expensive whiskeys, thousands, hundreds, thousands of pounds, whatever it may be. You can keep it there for Pesach from the Torah because you've relinquished your property and ownership rights over it. The Torah says, "Lo yera'eh lecha v'lo yimatzeh lecha hametz." There should not be, you shouldn't see or there shouldn't be found to you hametz. Yeah, there's no prohibition against seeing chametz. I can walk past the bakery on Pesach and see bread. Nothing wrong with that. We'll talk about smelling chametz intentionally, whether you're allowed to do that or not. But nothing wrong with me walking past and seeing chametz on Pesach. The Torah says it mustn't be seen. Chametz which belongs to you. Once I've relinquished ownership over it, it's fine. Hachamim, for two reasons, did not accept this and said you can't rely on the on just nullifying. Firstly, they said, is that the reality is that people may not do it sincerely and genuinely. To say, I relinquish everything which I have, there has to be a serious and genuine declarer. And so that would mean that if a non-Jew came into your house on Pesach and decides to empty you, if you had a burglary over Pesach and your entire whiskey stash was stolen, you wouldn't be able to claim that on your insurance claim. Person has a very expensive whiskey collection, thousands of pounds. It's insured. And it's stolen over Pesach. You shouldn't feel sad about that because it never belonged to you anyway. Now, reality is people may not be genuine about it. Hachamim said, no, it's not enough just to do bitul, just to nullify. You have to actually you have to get rid of it. You have to check for it and get rid of it. Secondly, they said is that even if you did genuinely and sincerely nullify your hametz, but sometimes over Pesach you forget it's Pesach, and you may come to, if it's in front of you, you may come to eat it, you may come to drink it, you may come to benefit from it. And therefore they said it's not enough to nullify it. You have to actually check and expel it from your house. Okay. Now, I know you may be thinking nowadays we keep our chametz in our homes. Yeah, that's because we sell it. It's a whole new thing, the selling, and it's a much later concept, the whole selling of chametz, and we'll talk about that, the whole selling of chametz. But assuming now there's no sale of chametz, you could, from the Torah's perspective, just keep it in your house and nullify it. Hachamim said no, it won't be genuine. B, you may forget, you may be tempted and eat and drink. Therefore, you have to expel it from your house. You have to destroy it from your house. And therefore, we search for it on the night before Pesach. Good. So that's the core of understanding of what Bedikat Hametz is about. Now, we do this the day before Pesach. Now, why did the Hachamim institute this at night? Why did they not do it during the day? You need to use an air. You need to use a candle so that you're able to check the nooks and crannies of the house. fine. But then establish it on even on the third. If you want to see on the 14th, it's too busy. Yeah, okay, so do it on the 13th. So simple reason is because that's the time people are back from work, in the evening, people are free to do this. In the day, they're not free to do this. Another reason given, which is a slight enough given, is that if during the day, if you want to search the nooks and crannies of the house, it's hard to do. But at nighttime with the candle is beneficial. That it allows you that extra ability to be able to see in the corners of the house. Bear that reason in mind. So there's a discussion about. Let's talk about it now. So fine. So we learned at the beginning of the night. We said the reason for this mitzvah, and we said it's done at night with a candle. So can I use? What would you say? Can I use a torch? Can I use the torch on one's phone? Does that work as or haner, as the light of the candle, for the purposes of Bedikat Chametz? Because it has the same, if not better, I imagine. Yeah, better. Yeah, I would say. I think better than a flame, a torch is, and so perhaps that should work. And yeah, the poskim do accept that works. But let me ask you another question: when we do Bedikat Hametz, do you need to switch the lights off? So it's a custom in some places. It's my parents' custom from Syria. In Syria, they did this. They would switch the lights off. Why? But you got the electricity, and that's the whole purpose of the candle is to help you in the dark because it didn't have electricity in those days. Now you got electricity. You got the best or haner. You got the best candle. So perhaps the justification for this minhag is what we've just seen in Mishnah Berurah. We said that actually Hachamim choose it at night. Simple reason is because then people are free, but also because the contrast of the night, of the darkness with the flame brings out more the corners and the nooks and crannies. And so you could argue that perhaps, even though we have electricity now, it's better to switch the lights off and use the candle. I think it's quite far-fetched that. But as I said, definitely the Syrians do this. I personally don't. I decided, it makes much more sense to keep the lights on, and that's what we do. And so just to bear that in mind, it's just a nice minhag some people have, but you're not bound to it. And if you're able to do the Bedikat Hametz better and more efficiently with the lights on, then of course that's fine to do. Now, the other thing we need to be aware of, and we're going to develop this more in 2 chapters time that we will learn next week, B'ezrat Hashem, that is that this Bedikat Hametz is for all places you haven't checked before Pesach. So in those days, there was no in the Gemara's times, in the Rishonim times, certainly there was no concept that you would spend 4 weeks, 3 weeks, 2 weeks preparing for Pesach and cleaning out the house. Pesach cleaning. There wasn't that. Otherwise, we would have had a chapter during the month of Nisan about cleaning up a Pesach. The first time we talk about searching for Chametz is on Erev Pesach 14th. What would happen is you would come on the 14th in the night and you would search 3, 4, 5 hours throughout the night. You would search and get rid of any Chametz, and that would be your whole Pesach cleaning for the year. That's it. The reality is circumstances have changed. We've got bigger homes, we've got more appliances, we've got more things, we've got more, life is much more complex. And so there's many more things to check. And so this is how it's happened that we check things in advance. If I have checked those things in advance, do I need to check them again on Pesach night? Sometimes it feels that it's a bit pointless. I've did this all before. And the answer is no. A person has checked it before, then he doesn't need to. If he is certain that no Hametz has come in since the time they have checked it last. What does that mean? He's certain. That means he or she living in the home know that they or he or she have not gone into this room since it's been checked. You can rely on that. However, we'll see this explicitly in a few chapters' time, when there are children involved, then that doesn't, when the children involved, you have to actually go through things again, which is within the child's capability of reaching. So the Gemara actually says the child's like a mouse. Like a mouse takes chametz from one place to another. And you see this, once you have kids, you know exactly what we're talking about. We find things around the house in the middle of nowhere, just happen, how did they get there? Well, the baby moved it around and so on. And so then actually anywhere where within the reach of the child has to be researched again on Pesach night. So yes, you do the initial cleaning in advance, but actually you still have to go through anything on the ground or the drawers on the ground which the child can reach, and may have put his or her sandwich walking around the house and dropped a bit of their sandwich in it. So you need to check for that as well on the night of Pesach. But note, the Shulchan Aruch says, only in places where it's the derech to bring chametz into it. This applies both in the night of Pesach and the month of Pesach when Pesach people are cleaning. There is absolutely no mitzvah in cleaning out your chandelier or cleaning out the toilet or cleaning out places if you know you have a strict policy in the house, you don't bring food up. You don't need to do any bedikat chametz upstairs. Again, when you don't have babies. You have little kids. That's different. If you have little kids, you have to search everywhere, even the toilets. Anywhere where the child can reach within once you've gone past that age, you don't have that in the house anymore, and you have adults or responsible children, and there is a policy that you don't have to check that. Top of a cupboard in a bedroom or the attic, there's no need to check that because chametz is never bought there. People are never going to eat there. You're never going to store some chametz there. And so these places don't need to be checked at all. At all don't need to be checked. Okay? סעיף ב' ייזהר כל אדם שלא יתחיל בשום מלאכה ולא יאכל עד שיבדוק. You may not begin an activity or eating once until you've done bedikat chametz. אפילו אם יש לו עת קבוע ללמוד, לא ילמוד עד שיבדוק. Even if you got a fixed chavruta in the evening, you still should not check. You should not study until you've checked. However, if you did begin learning before, you can continue. You don't have to stop. However, the Rama says you do have to stop. So let me explain what's going on here. Discuss the points here. So there is a halakha in many, many places that when you have a certain mitzvah, which is easy to forget about, you can't do certain things once the time for the mitzvah has arrived. Minha, whole chapter in Shabbat, Mishnah in Shabbat about it. Arvit. Once the time of Minha has come, you can't go to the bathhouse. You can't have a haircut. Now, haircuts you're allowed to nowadays because now it's a much smaller thing. But going to, let's say, a workout in a gym, something which takes time, or going to a spa day, once the time of Minha has arrived, you can't do that anymore because these are things which take a good few hours. And so the time of Minha will pass. So once the time comes, you can't begin that. If I began in the morning at 11 o'clock and then time of Minha came, I can continue. I have to stop. So I began Behete. Eating as well. You can't have a whole meal before these things. Unless you make a shomer, you make someone to remind you with Minha Narawit. But we find this in many other aspects as well. And here we're finding the same thing. You can't, once the time has come, and actually the poskim states for half an hour before, at least for eating, you can't have a meal and you can't begin a new activity from when that time has arrived. Now, normally the halakha is a meal is forbidden. But I can have something small. I can have some fruit. I can have things which don't include bread, and so on and so forth. Small things I can have. And that's how some poskim understand this to be, that you can have something small. However, the Mishnah Berurah holds that actually, once the time has arrived, there's a special din in Bedikat Chametz. And we see this in a couple of places, that it's more than just the regular din, that when the mitzvah has arrived, you should do it as soon as possible. The Hachamim instituted it at the beginning of the night. The Takanat Hazal was that you begin the mitzvah at the beginning of the night, which is why some of the poskim hold that if you have Arvit and Bedikat Hametz, you pray Bedikat Hametz, you do Bedikat Hametz first, because the mitzvah is to be the beginning of the night. The Arvit can be done the whole night. The halakha, by the way, we hold Arvit is first. we Sfaradim hold Arvit is first. But the point is that there's an understanding that the takana of Bedikat Chametz was to be done at the beginning of the night. And therefore, even having something small to eat, once the time has arrived, once it's the time of Bedikat Chametz, a person needs to begin straight away. If they were eating before, they can continue. But if they're not doing anything, then they have to actually do it now. The Ramah holds even more. The Ramah holds even if you were eating before, you were learning for, you were doing this before, which normally and everywhere else where we have this halakha, the halakha is that if you began before Beheter, you can continue. Here he says no. Here he says you have to stop what you're doing, which is very unique, which shows you this idea that Bedikat has to be done right at the beginning of the night. And so therefore we should remember that this is a mitzvah which we begin as soon as possible. The beginning of the night, one should not be late with it. What does the beginning of the night mean? Beginning of the night means nightfall. In England, that can be late, especially this year. Pesach is after the clocks change. It'll be somewhere around 8 o'clock, perhaps even later. Nightfall, probably later actually. Nightfall will probably be around 8:15 or 8:30, mid-April. And so there is room to allow one to begin already from Shkia, already from sunset, provided the Bedikat continues into nightfall something. Okay, so if it's hard and they've got the kids up and you want them to take part in it, so on and so forth, there is room to say to begin from Shkia in Northern Hemisphere, in England, etc., as long as one continues into the night itself. Okay, yes, questions? Mark.
How do we reconcile the fact that with Hanukkah, we have to light the candles and then do our beat? But here you're telling me I've got to do our beat first before I do Bedikat?
Excellent question.
And they're both rabbinic, right?
They're both rabbinic. So Chanukah, why did we learn that you should light at the beginning of the night? We said because even though Arvit is biblical, and Shema, and Arvit is the more frequent one, so therefore logic would say you have to pray Arvit first. But because the mitzvah of Chanukah is done at the beginning of the night, so therefore it has to be done then, whereas Arvit can be done anytime of the night. So if we say do Chanukah first, if your question of whether to do Arvit or light candles is at the beginning of the night, if it's 8 o'clock at night, then of course we said you do Arvit first. So you're asking a great question, which is same here. Bedikat Chametz, the beginning of the night. And so therefore we should say that's a mitzvah which is going to pass. So therefore we should say do that and then pray Arvit after. Two answers to that. It's a great question. Number one is that it's this idea which we've said that it's to be done at the beginning of the night is debatable. It's not so clear, he says, he does say bithilat, but then he also says that you don't have to stop. If it was a mitzvah which you have to do then, Hanukkah, if you're eating, you should stop and light at the right time. Yeah, because it has to be done then. So that's why it seems to be less of a beginning of the night emphasis. And secondly, Bedikat Chametz is a mitzvah which takes much longer. It takes hours. And so because of that, there is the concern that actually it's going to take so long. By the end of it, you're going to not be able to do Arvit anymore. So that's why they said you do Arvit before Bedikat Chametz. Even if you want to say that Bedikat Chametz has to be done at the beginning of the night, but still Arvit should be before because it's a much longer mitzvah, whereas lighting candles takes 1 minute.
Rabbi, but we're told that one should light the candles of Hanukkah as long as the people walking in the street. Once they stop walking, then you can still do it, but not l'atchila. It's not the idea here that we should light it as early as possible, because early as possible at night in the winter when we do it up here is 3-4 o'clock. It's people are already gone. They're still at work. Nobody is walking the street.
So what's your question? I don't understand.
So the timing of lighting the Hanukkah, it can be delayed a bit when people walking the street going home.
I don't want to go into that now. We discussed. Yeah, it's a whole different topic. We discussed when we did Hilchot Hanukkah. Yes, there is such an argument. There is such an argument. Yes, but it's still everyone still agrees. Still better to do it at the beginning at 4:30. Everyone agrees that it's the correct thing to do. And there is yeah. Anyway, let's not go in. I don't want to get. We had a whole shiur on that when we did Chanukah, the correct timing nowadays, but fine. So that's that. Okay. So this underscores the importance of doing it as soon as possible, and therefore not engaging in new activities from when it becomes nightfall, or at least half an hour before nightfall. But if you began before that, you can continue. But once that time comes, one should stop. One should start getting ready for Bedikat Chametz. Good. Let's begin. Let's try to do the next chapter. We've got a few minutes. Taf Lamed Bet. We'll end at 7. B'ezrat Hashem. Taf Lamed Bet. 432. Din Birkat Bedikat Chametz U'Bet Seifim. Now we talk about the bracha of Bedikat Chametz. Kodem she'atchil livdok, before, because whenever you do a mitzvah, you say the bracha before. Yivarech should say the blessing Asher Geshem Tzivanu al bi'ur hametz, on the bi'ur of hametz. What does bi'ur hametz mean? Bi'ur means the destruction. Again, we're going to learn soon about what is considered bi'ur, what is considered the destruction of hametz. Contrary to what people believe, you do not have to. We Sfaradim hold you do not have to burn hametz. We hold bi'ur means. There's a debate what the word bi'ur means. Does it mean to burn? Ashkenazim understand it mean to burn, which is why they're particularly to burn. Whereas we understand it to mean to destroy, to get rid of. And we'll talk about that. But the point is, bi'ur means either destruction or burning of hametz, which is peculiar because now we're doing a mitzvah of searching for hametz. So why are we saying a bracha of al bi'ur hametz on the destruction of hametz, when now the mitzvah we're about to engage in is actually bedikat hametz? Right? Simple question. Every time we say this blessing, we should be thinking this. Why are we saying al bi'ur chametz, which means to destroy the chametz? And actually, now we're not destroying it. We are checking for it. So, of course, the bedikah is the means for the bi'ur. In order to destroy, you have to search first. So that's why you could say it's going on the end of it, on the end purpose of it. But still, we could ask, is that say the bracha of al bedikat hametz? True, you need to do bedikat hametz for biur hametz. So just say al bedikat hametz. And the answer for that is that bedikat hametz is only a means to an end. There is nothing intrinsic in mitzvah, although the Hachamim instituted it, but they instituted it as an ability to be able to do biur hametz properly. They told you to search in the night so that you then go and destroy the next day. So therefore, the end purpose of the bedikah is the biur. If they didn't want to institute a blessing to do bedikat hametz, and actually it's only half thing. If I do the whole bedikat hametz on the night, every nook and cranny, but then I don't bother to do anything the next day, you've wasted everyone's time. Hachamim didn't have that in mind. And in mind, you search so that you're able then to go and destroy the next day. And so therefore, since it's for the end of it, this is why we say the bi'ur al-leva'er hametz. That's why we say al-bi'ur hametz rather than al-bedikat hametz. Yes, Robert.
It does seem a little bit unprecedented, though, that we have a bracha that we make on the evening, and then we're not going to enact the kind of essential part of it for another 12 hours. Normally, we're very particular to make the bracha, immediately before.
Yeah, that's a fair point. That's a fair point.
Is there other precedents where we don't listen to we don't make the bracha of shofar and lulav 12 hours before? I mean, is there any other precedents for this?
No, the answer. I'm trying to think if there are precedents. I don't think there are. But 1 second. But the answer to that is that, as we said, the bi'ur chametz, the bracha is for the bedikah. The bracha is going on the bedikah. But we use the word of bi'ur because the bedikah is a means for the bi'ur. So it's not like you're thinking there's a hefsek of 12 hours to the next morning till we get rid of it. There's no hefsek because the mitzvah is the bedikah itself. But we don't want to say bracha on the bedikah because that's a bit pointless. So the end. So therefore, we're doing the mitzvah of searching, but we wanted to say the bracha of what the searching is for. So it's still over rasiyata. It's still no hefsek. You see what I mean? Now, is there a precedent for this concept where we're doing bracha on one thing and saying a bracha on something else? I can't think offhand. Yeah, it is pretty unique.
So if one doesn't destroy, or if one has nothing to destroy, I'm just trying, just trying to get my head. We could, you could argue you should make a second Brahma.
So actually, that's a great point you've raised. There's a big discussion. If a person who is a beggar doesn't own a home, doesn't have a house, lives on the street, does he do Bedikat Chametz?
Well, presumably he's got a pocket to empty, so one would say yeah.
But who said that the Bedikat Chametz is on a pocket? That's not simple. Halacha we hold you don't say Bedikat. You don't do bracha. Because the takana was a kind of your homes, the places where you live. If you don't have a place to live, yeah, you've got pockets, but the Hachamim didn't institute bedika on pockets. Yeah, agav, we do that as well, but there wasn't an institution to check these places, right? And therefore, actually, it's a debate about that. It's interesting. It's a very interesting point, that. But my point is, why did we come to this point? So you still got a question?
No, we were just discussing, your point you made is the bracha is on the searching, but we enunciate the bracha on the destruction, even though the destruction doesn't happen until later, and there's no separate bracha on the destruction. So presumably one sort of has in mind that this bracha covers me, because I don't finish.
That clearly. But scheme that clearly that biur chametz you have in mind for the bedikai doing now, for the biur tomorrow morning.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And this is why we don't say leva'er chametz. It's not leva'er. You're not going to do it. Leva'er means I'm about to do it now. Al means on. It's going to happen. We're doing the Bedikat on it for tomorrow. That's why, that's why we say Albi or not Leva'er Chametz. Okay, let's finish off. If you forgot to say a blessing, you can say a blessing anytime you're still searching, because it's still a bracha before the mitzvah, because the mitzvah is to search your entire home. So if I search half the home and then I forgot, I can say a bracha and search the other half of the home. You must not speak from when you have said the bracha until you have begun searching. You should also really not speak. It's good not to speak until you finish the entire search, to set you focus and pay attention. So the crucial time where you're not allowed to speak, once I said the bracha, to start searching. To look around, start searching. Once I've done one room, I've searched a bit, and I've done something, then if necessary, you can speak, because the bracha has been hal on something, but it's better not to, in order to stay focused on the search. It doesn't mean you need to walk around, what's up there, yeah? Anything got to do with the search, you're allowed to speak for. You're allowed to say, what's in the cupboard there? Has this cupboard been checked? What is this ingredient? Is this kasher pesach? Not kasher pesach? All of that, obviously, it's all part of the bedikah. That's all you should speak. You should be clear about that. Talking about answering phone calls, nothing to do with bedikat chametz. That's something which try to avoid if possible, though if it's urgent, one may take a phone call in the middle of bedikat chametz. Excellent. Lovely. We will continue with Hashem Bedikat Chametz next week. So tonight we've done almost 4 chapters. We've learned about the preparation for learning before Pesach and Tzedakah before Pesach. We learned about Shabbat HaGadol, talk about the correct time Bedikat Chametz, and what happens when the time arrives. And finally, we've ended off with the bracha and speaking during Bedikat Chametz. Continue next week, same time as Hashem. Have a wonderful evening. Shabbat Shalom. Lovely to see you all again. And continue